What is the secret to getting people to truly listen to you? Most people believe they simply need to find the right words or come across as likable. But whether someone listens to you at all is often decided before you've even finished your second sentence. You begin telling a story and suddenly notice that the other person is responding with nothing more than a brief mm-hmm. Eventually, you simply stop talking. Just a few minutes later, someone else starts speaking. And suddenly, the very same person is listening attentively. Or you explain something you truly believe in. You do your best, explain it as clearly as possible, and yet it feels as if none of it gets through. Later, someone else says almost the exact same thing, and suddenly it seems obvious and perfectly clear. Most people then assume the problem lies in their choice of words. They think they should have explained it better, or simply been more quick-witted. But that's where they're looking in the wrong place. Our brain decides surprisingly quickly whether someone deserves our attention, and that decision often has less to do with the content than we think. Before we consciously think about what's being said, our subconscious has already begun evaluating the person speaking. So what actually sets these people apart from everyone else? Some people begin speaking, and almost automatically, all eyes turn toward them. They are neither the loudest nor constantly telling spectacular stories. Yet attention seems to come to them almost effortlessly. What's striking is that many of these people don't appear to use any special communication technique at first glance. They don't use secret phrases or psychological tricks. In fact, they often speak more slowly and with fewer words than everyone else. And that's what makes this topic so fascinating. Most people look for the difference in the words someone uses, but that difference emerges much earlier. Within just a few seconds, our brain begins evaluating the speaker. Does this person seem credible, confident, calm, trustworthy? All of this happens completely automatically. Only then does our brain decide how much attention it wants to give the message itself. At first, that may seem surprising, because two people can deliver the exact same message and still be perceived completely differently. The real question is not whether you're born as someone people automatically listen to, but what actually creates that first impression in the first place. Because it can be influenced far more than most people realize, and that first impression often determines whether a message gets a fair chance at all. That's exactly why brilliant ideas can go unnoticed, while just a few words from someone else captivate the entire room. But why does our brain judge people so quickly in the first place? Wouldn't it make far more sense to listen first and form an opinion afterward? The answer begins thousands of years ago, when communication could literally determine life or death. Our ancestors lived in small groups. Strangers could either be allies or a threat. The brain simply didn't have time to analyze every statement in detail. It had to decide in an instant who deserved attention and who didn't. That's why our brain still relies on shortcuts today. Before we consciously think about the content, it collects countless small clues. How does someone move? How do they react under pressure? Do their facial expressions, voice, and behavior match? From all these signals, a first impression forms almost instantly. But that impression doesn't determine whether someone is right. It only determines whether our brain is willing to keep listening. That's exactly why brilliant ideas can fail, even when they are just as good as someone else's. But what criteria does our brain actually use to make that decision? This is where our brain does something unexpected. It doesn't primarily look for confidence, intelligence, or perfect wording. Instead, it tries to answer two questions almost immediately. Should I pay attention to this person? And should I keep listening to them? To answer the second question, our brain relies on countless small clues. Does this person remain calm under pressure? Can they admit mistakes without immediately becoming defensive, or does their demeanor constantly change? From all these signals, our brain forms an impression of how credible and reliable someone seems. That's why people often lose attention without even realizing it. Not because they speak too loudly once or choose an awkward phrase, but because their signals become inconsistent over time. Someone may seem confident at first, but immediately become insecure when criticized. Suddenly, bold words no longer match their behavior, or their friendliness simply feels forced. Our brain notices these contradictions surprisingly quickly, and we begin to lose interest. On the other hand, people often stay attentive when words, voice, and behavior all tell the same story. Not because these people speak perfectly, but because our brain needs less effort to make sense of them. But this also seems to create a contradiction. If our brain prefers that kind of consistency, why do loud, provocative, or completely unpredictable people often attract so much attention? Politicians, influencers, and entertainers seem to contradict this rule all the time. The answer is that our brain evaluates something entirely different first. Before deciding whether it's worth listening further, it first checks whether something deserves our attention at all. And for that, anything new, unexpected, or unusual is especially effective. For our ancestors, change could mean opportunity or danger. That pattern developed over thousands of years. Provocative statements don't gain attention because they're more convincing. They gain attention because they stand out. Whether that turns into genuine listening is decided afterward. At that point, the mechanism we just talked about takes over again. Only then does our brain ask, do this person's words, behavior, and overall presence remain consistent over time? That's the difference between people who attract attention and people others truly listen to. Attention can arise within seconds. Genuine listening has to be earned, and that's why so many people fail at the wrong point. They try to sound more interesting, even though our brain has already reached completely different conclusions. But even if someone gives us their attention, that doesn't mean they're truly listening. This is where the distinction most people overlook begins. Because the real secret isn't speaking better. It's recognizing what kind of conversation the other person actually wants to have. Imagine someone tells you about a stressful day. They're not looking for a solution to their problem. They simply want someone to understand how they feel. But instead of empathy, they immediately receive unsolicited advice. Or someone excitedly tells you about a new idea. They hope someone will share their excitement. Instead, the first thing they hear is why it will never work. Both people are talking about the same topic, but one is having an emotional conversation. The other is already having a problem-solving conversation. One is looking for understanding. The other is trying to help, and that's why both often walk away with the same feeling. The other person didn't listen to me at all. So many conversations don't fail because of a lack of intelligence or quick thinking. They fail because two people unknowingly have completely different expectations of the same conversation. Interestingly, this even happens between people who have known each other for years. One simply wants to talk. The other believes they need to help as quickly as possible. Both have good intentions, yet in the end, neither feels understood. You've probably experienced someone saying to you after a conversation, "Thank you for simply listening," even though you hardly said anything. Or there have been other situations where you made every possible argument and still felt like you never got through to the other person. That's the difference. Listening often begins long before anyone responds. It begins the moment the other person feels that their true intention has been understood. Only then does the conversation itself begin to change. Questions suddenly become more important than answers. You no longer try to convince first, you try to understand first. Perhaps good communication changes at exactly that moment. Not when we find better answers, but when we recognize the question the other person is actually trying to have answered. Only in that moment does a conversation stop feeling like two people trying to persuade each other and start feeling like something that genuinely connects them both.